may want to go back through this recording, and for also some of our mentors who couldn't make it today. So this is a very brand new webinar. We've run lots of webinars for our mentees, but we thought it was time that we offered something to our mentors. So we're going to run a series of webinars to help our mentors do better mentoring with their mentees. Everyone's doing a great job at the moment, and we're learning from each other in our monthly meetings, but we thought we would go outside of our network and invite other speakers that can just give us some more information and insights into various different topics. So hopefully this will be the start of something good and help you all in your mentoring sessions. So I am delighted to invite our first presenters, Nicole and Joe from Ambitious About Autism, a charity you may be aware of. And we shared the stage with them at the Institute of Student Employers in the summer in Brighton, and we talked to hundreds of senior graduate recruiters, HR managers, directors from all over the country, making them aware of the good work that Ambitious About Autism are doing under the banner of neurodiversity, which is at the top of the agenda for a lot of recruiters right now. I'm going to hand over to you, Nicole, to make your presentation, and there will be the opportunity to ask any questions at the end. Just use the chat box, and we'll go from there. Okay, over to you.
Thank you very much. I'll just get my presentation up. So thank you everyone for joining. I have been doing quite a bit of speaking over the last couple of days, and I've also finally that dreaded cold that's been doing the rounds has caught up to me. So I'm going to try and make it all the way through, but I might get a little bit squeakier towards the end. So please just bear with me if that happens. So my name's Nicole, and I'm an account manager on the Employee Autism Programme at Ambitious About Autism. And I'm also joined today by Joe, who will share a little bit more about himself in a little bit. And I'll be asking him some questions about his experience as an intern on our Employee Autism Programme. So I've tried as best I can to tailor, hopefully, the slides today towards kind of being able to best support autistic young people that you might meet in your mentoring. So a bit of an agenda. I'm going to do an introduction about Ambitious. We'll talk about what is autism, the autism spectrum, some practical tips for supporting autistic young people. I'll introduce you to the Employee Autism Programme, and then we'll hear from Joe about his experiences. So Ambitious About Autism is the national charity for autistic young people. We provide specialist autism education settings in London, and we work with autistic young people across the country to campaign for change. So we want to ensure that autistic young people can be valued in all aspects of their life, and especially important in my area of work, that they can go on to have valuable careers as well. So autism is a lifelong neurodevelopmental condition that affects the way a person communicates and how they experience the world around them. You can be diagnosed with autism at any point in your life, but the earlier you are diagnosed and then have access to meaningful support, the better the outcomes in later life. And autism is a spectrum condition. This means that while autistic people share certain characteristics, they will be highly individualized in their needs and preferences, which we'll come on to when we talk about the autism spectrum. And it's worth noting that I'll be using identity first language throughout, although it's a good idea to check with autistic people how they prefer to identify. My next slide, I've got a video for you to share with you, which is some of the members of our youth network talking about their experiences of autism. So that was a little bit of an introduction from some of our youth network. So when we're thinking about what is autism, it is about having differences in four main areas, which are social communication, social interaction, sensory differences, and routines. So autistic people are often very literal interpreters and communicators, and there may be little speech or an excellent vocabulary, and often take extra time to process conversations. Some autistic people are able to camouflage, but the social demand to do this can be exhausting. So this is sometimes known as masking. So non-autistic people should consciously practice adapting their communication to be clear, unambiguous, and literal. So autistic people have a different set of expectations for behavior. Small talk, touching, topics of conversation, etc. are all often misunderstood by non-autistic people. Autistic people are often highly empathetic, but express this differently, both verbally and non-verbally. And many non-autistic people struggle to recognize autistic empathy. Under or oversensitive sensory seeking or sensory avoiding is something that it can commonly occur. Each autistic person will have a different sensory profile, and any of the senses may be affected, and these can be different at different times. Autistic people often need well-structured activities with good visual supporting information, detail and context provided about any new or unfamiliar people, places or situations to feel well prepared and manage their anxieties. So here's some statistics about autism. So the official statistic is that 2 in 100 people in the UK are diagnosed as autistic, but this is purely via the NHS. So anyone that is self-diagnosed or privately diagnosed does not count towards that statistic, as well as, of course, the countless people who are not diagnosed at all. So we actually anticipate that this number is quite a bit higher than that. At the moment, around 3 times as many boys as girls are diagnosed as autistic, but this is likely to change as our understanding of autism in girls starts to change. And Ambitious About Autism actually has a campaign coming out next year about autism and girls. Disclosures of autism spectrum condition to UK higher education institutions rose 400% between 2004 and 2015. So what that says is that people are recognising autism more, they are being more comfortable disclosing it, and that more autistic people are going to university. But unfortunately, 6 months after graduation, those that disclosed that they were autistic were least likely to be employed than any other group, including all other disabilities. So that's in the whole time that autism has been treated as a separate group. It has had the lowest outcomes for work post-graduation. So I wanted to speak to you about the autism spectrum because I think it's an area that is quite misunderstood. So this representation of autism as a sliding scale can be really misleading, and sometimes you might hear people say, well, isn't everybody a bit autistic? The answer to that is no. We are all very different people and we have different characteristics, but we are not all autistic. Autism is not a linear scale like this, and we shouldn't place autistic people on a scale based on our assumptions of their abilities. It's more accurate to say that autism might influence some areas of the brain, while other areas will be no different from an average or neurotypical person. So the autism spectrum can be thought of as more of like a color wheel, where characteristics like motor skills and language blend together like the colors of a rainbow. So everyone autistic is different. Some people have highly developed skills in certain areas, while other people will find those same things challenging. And people with typical skills may place nearer or in the center of the wheel. As your skills differ, or if you experience difficulties in an area, you may place further towards the outer edge of the wheel. So here's some examples. So one person may be very good at making conversation, so language, but may experience sensory overload in loud and crowded spaces. Whereas another person might be happy in loud crowds, but find conversation hard, which would look more like this. So it's much more representative of the overall characteristics of an individual, rather than seeing it as you know, you're either at one end or you're at the other. There is no mild autism, there is no severe autism. We prefer to focus on an individual and their needs. So moving on to some practical tips for how you can support autistic young people that you may come to me in the mentoring that you're doing. So first of all, thinking about preparing to meet in the first place, help the autistic young person to gain the most from your discussions by sharing information in advance about what to expect from you and the sessions, including any questions that you'll be asking. By sharing this up front, it just helps to avoid any kind of discomfort that may come from anything unexpected. Send a profile to provide predictability and familiarity. So a one-page profile, which I have an example of on the next page, can provide a helpful introduction to you prior to meeting for the first time. And it can also be referred back to as needed and can be used to manage expectations around, for example, the regularity of communication, amongst other things. And we find that actually, if both parties complete a profile, then it creates a bit more of a level playing field and helps to manage everyone's expectations. So any forms or templates that you might need to complete, it's sometimes helpful to complete over more than one session to avoid overwhelming someone. There's too much information may cause the young person that you're working with to disengage. So allowing that extra time will help to remove any pressure, even if that pressure is perceived for that person. It may also be helpful to provide visual support to supplement any other information, as this will help a visual learner to help better understand what is happening. And often autistic people will be, their experience will be enhanced by visual supports. So I'm just going to show you what my one-page profile looks like at Ambitious About Autism. So this is just one example, but there can be many other things included in it. And so we use these across the organization. Everybody has one, whether they are autistic or not. And it's a really helpful way to share some things about yourself, the things that you enjoy, what's important, but also how you work best, how you communicate, perhaps, and any other information that might be beneficial to the relationship. And as I mentioned before, if both parties do it, then it can be quite a leveling activity. And it also gives you a little bit of insight into, you know, some aspects of life that maybe you would be less likely to speak about, but help you get to know each other. So communication is really important. I already mentioned it earlier on, but saying what you mean and being clear and literal is really, really important. And also meaning what you say. So if you say you're going to do something by a certain time, please do give time frames, then you must follow through with that, or be able to communicate as early as possible about any changes in what you said that you were going to do, as well as a clear reason for it. Avoid using jargon, acronyms, abbreviations. I think anyone that started a new role in a new place will, there's always a learning period where you have to kind of discover what all of the acronyms mean that are in this new place. It's no different for an autistic person, but is going to add even more challenge when there might already be some communication challenges. Organizing the text, and you organize text and use accessible fonts and colors. So I'm going to share some resources afterwards. I'll share the slides with Dan, and I'll also send out a link to some other resources that you can access via our website. We have a great guide about communication, and that will tell you about how you can create more accessible documents. But a lot of it's very straightforward. It's about using really clear fonts. So for example, in our organization, we always use 12-point Arial for any written documents, as that's known to be an accessible font, making sure that you're putting the right colors on different backgrounds so that it's clear enough to read. It's worth pointing out as well that a lot of these communication supports, they're never going to be detrimental to anyone else. So they can, by implementing them, not only are you going to be supporting an autistic young person, but you might be doing a favor to anyone else that you're working with as well, particularly anyone that has any other neurodiversity, for example, dyslexia or ADHD, will also benefit from this kind of communication. It's really important to carefully listen to the words the person is saying and not trying to rely on their body language, because this is not necessarily going to be displaying in the same way that you might expect from a neurotypical person. So really focus on those words and don't try and read too much into something that you're not seeing. So making all adaptations that you can to both your own practices and your organization's processes will enable better engagement. And with good preparation and adapting your communication, your mentee should feel comfortable and prepared to engage with you. But if the person isn't verbally responsive, then give them some extra time. Don't fill in brief silences, for example, less than 5 seconds, before reframing a question, as it may just be that extra processing time that's needed. Now, finally, coming on to specifically around careers advice. So I know that some of the conversations that you'll be having with your mentees are going to be around their careers. So we have an area of work in Employ Autism that is supported by careers advisors, and these were some of the tips they shared. So focus on their strengths and how they might match a role. So for example, if someone is interested in maths, what skills does this equate to? For example, problem solving, recognizing patterns, attention to detail. What we see is that for a lot of the young people we work with, they're not necessarily looking at the skills required for a role, or even thinking that they have the skills required for a role, because it isn't broken down in a way that explains that well. So as coming on to the next point, again, because of potentially being overwhelmed by too much information, it's really important to break things down. So if you can try to ascertain the level of understanding about the requirements for the role and then assist with matching them to their skill set, that will be really helpful, because then you can match up where their skills lie and the skills that are required for the job. It may also be worth discussing their approach to job applications. So something else that we see is that some people are sending out the same kind of generic CV to many employers and having a kind of scattergun approach to sending them out, and then not understanding why they aren't getting a response, even though it isn't a tailored approach. And they aren't necessarily thinking also about whether those roles are really matching their skills and abilities, but more about just reaching as many people as possible. But then on the flip side of that, other people may be sending out one application at a time and then waiting to hear back. So it's worth talking about the consequences for either of these approaches and trying to find a kind of happy medium approach, which is likely to be more successful. So something that is also helpful to talk about, particularly if someone is applying for jobs or is in work, is discussing their disclosure and how comfortable they are talking about their autism. So when discussing their autism, it's important to be open-minded. If they don't feel comfortable, they do not need to disclose, but it is worth talking about the benefits of disclosure. For example, if someone tells the employer that they are autistic upfront, then they might be able to get support during the interview and the recruitment stage. And they could potentially ask for questions in advance as an adjustment. Something that can often be beneficial is to disclose with extra information. So to share that they are autistic, but to be upfront about any adjustments that may be required, because what this shows the employer is that they are able to communicate their needs clearly, and then the employer can start making those adjustments early on. However, as mentioned, can be quite a sensitive subject for some people, and if they aren't comfortable doing that, then absolutely they should not be forced to do so, but obviously encouraged to kind of become more comfortable. So I've put here as well about that any volunteering should be time bound and purposeful. Something that we see quite often, particularly with autistic young people, is that they can get kind of stuck in voluntary roles. So volunteering can be really beneficial, but it can also cause some challenges. And so it's really important that any voluntary role they're doing is going to enhance their skills and abilities and not actually mean that they aren't progressing. We've met many people who have perhaps started working in a charity shop and they're still there several years later, despite having many skills and talents that mean they could move on to a more varied career. But if that volunteering is time bound, so they do it for a set period of time, a fixed time, and it's really intentional. So if they're really thinking about the type of role they might be taking on in a voluntary capacity, then it can really enhance their CV and their experiences. But it's something to be really mindful because all of the internships that we provide at Employ Autism are paid. However, there are many out there that are not. And we don't want people to be stuck in for a long time not receiving payment for their work. So I'm going to move on now to tell you a bit about the Employ Autism program. So in February of this year, the Office of National Statistics reported a rise in employment for autistic people in work from 21.7% to 29%. So that's in any kind of paid employment. So this is good news, but more needs to be done to keep this moving in a positive direction. This figure also hides the underemployment that is happening for autistic people, as I mentioned with the volunteering, who are maybe working in roles that are lower than their abilities or qualifications. So even those who are employed are not necessarily being given the opportunity to reach their potential. So these are just some of the reasons that employers should be attracting and retaining autistic talent. They're not universal. All autistic people will have their own skill sets, and these are diverse, but there are certain qualities that can make a real difference. For example, offering a unique perspective is something we are really appreciative of having from our autistic colleagues. There's also lots of evidence to demonstrate attention to detail and hyperfocus as being really positive attributes. For example, we've been working with an employer recently who did as part of their interview process, they did a task-based interview, which is something that we encourage from our employers. And it was a data task using spreadsheets. And usually when they set these tasks for their applicants, they receive maybe around a 50% success rate with the completion of them. And with their autistic candidates, they received a nearly 100% success rate with completion. And not only that, but the candidates were also able to point out mistakes that were not intended. So the data set had some intentional mistakes, so that which was part of the task to point those out. But actually what came back was some additional errors that the company hadn't actually even been aware of. One of which was the spelling of a word in Chinese, or Mandarin. And so they were really impressed at that level of that extra level of attention to detail. So we're really hoping that employers will be able to see the difference that can be made to their workforce. And this infographic was taken from a piece of research about the strengths of autistic people in the workplace. And as I mentioned, the main strengths identified from the research's data revealed cognitive advantages such as superior creativity, focus and memory, increased efficiency, and personal qualities such as honesty and dedication, and the ability to offer a unique autism-specific perspective. So around 8 years ago, our youth network helped us to design an employment program. The purpose of this was to provide training and support to employers who offer paid experience of work to autistic young people as part of their careers experience. So since then, we've received funding to work with employers and professionals across the country to provide the necessary understanding, skills and resources so that they can help autistic people to benefit from accessing opportunities of work. And this is our Employ Autism program. So it's all about changing the system and not the individual. So really focusing on some of that systemic change. All of the work that we're doing is being independently evaluated. It's part of a longitudinal study. We're hoping to get the results of that next year, but it is still ongoing. But our early insights have been really, really positive. And what we've also heard from our research is that actually the project is really groundbreaking, not just in the UK, but globally. There aren't many other people doing this kind of work. And our organisations are based nationally. So we're working with companies all over the UK. So our offer to employers is that we can provide training to staff on understanding autism. Our training has been evaluated. It has been proven to be statistically significant to the employers that undertake it. And it's 6 hours of training spread over 2 sessions. We can share tools and resources to help adapt recruitment and retention practices, so some of which I will share with you after this session. We can provide connections to a network of diverse employer partners. So just this morning, we had a networking event where we brought together people from a wide range of different companies to share their experiences of the program and to learn from each other. We will promote any participation in the program. So we would advertise that via our LinkedIn, our website, and anywhere else you would wish for it to be shared. And also it's having an opportunity to input into that evaluation that I just mentioned. So the internships themselves could be in any role or department. The placement lengths are for a minimum of 8 weeks up to about a year if somebody wants it to go that long. And there can be flexibility in hours, location, salary. That's something that we can help with. And throughout the process, there will be support from the Ambitious About Autism team. So we're always there on hand to help out if there are any challenges. So these are some of the employers that we have been working with just over the last few years, as well as many more that are not listed there. So now I'm going to stop sharing and I'm going to introduce Joe, who is I'm going to ask him some questions about his experiences with employee autism. So can you please introduce yourself, Joe?
Hey everyone. Everyone hear me all right? Is it okay?
Yep. Oh yeah, I think that's good.
Yeah, I'm Joe. I'm 21 years old and I'm a third year politics and international relations student at the University of Sussex in Brighton.
So how did you hear about the employee autism internship opportunity?
Yeah, I received an email from my student support team at the university, which kind of described the employee autism program, and they asked me what kind of preferences I'd be interested in terms of job, company, role, etc. And I thought from there it sounded good, so I thought I might as well give it a shot.
And what was your role during the internship?
So I was a policy intern for 8 weeks for a member of parliament in Bristol, which involved drafting and replying to constituent responses, which covered a wide range of issues. For example, like local issues, like people who wanted to fix a bridge in Bristol, to national issues like fox hunting, and even international issues like the Israel-Palestine situation. And I really enjoyed that because it meant that the work was like varied every week, and I got to experience lots of different issues and snapshots into people's lives and big international issues and things. I also sat in on weekly review meetings with the MP and the team, and at first I wasn't really expected to contribute much, but towards the end I was contributing regularly, and I really enjoyed that. And I'd say my favorite part about the role was that I got like straight feedback from the constituents I work with because they'd email back and tell me like whether I was allowed to help them or not, and that was really useful and helpful. And also, I think the team were impressed with my work, and they said if I wanted to, then there would be a employment opportunity there after my degree. So that was really great for me.
And how did you find the recruitment process for your internship?
Yeah, I found it really straightforward and a bit unusual because I sent my CV directly to the MP, and from there, there were no interview processes, which is quite unusual, I think. But that really helped with me because I find interviews to be quite uncertain and stressful. And so it was quite straightforward. And after background checks, I was able to start a few months in. And then from there, like as soon as I started the job, they kind of gradually like had me meet the members of the team rather than all at once, which I think was better because it means I wasn't overwhelmed by a bunch of people at the start.
And how has the internship role prepared you for the job you would like to gain in the future?
It might not have informed me about what exactly I want to do in the future, but it has helped me with my studies a lot because obviously I'm a politics student, so I was able to take things directly from my internship straight into my uni degree, and also since I was writing responses, it helped me kind of crack down a succinct writing style, which is very helpful for essays and other short things. Even when I'm sending emails to like lecturers or people in general, it's nice to have that since I was writing emails all the time at the job.
And how has the Employee Autism Program helped you?
I'd say the biggest way it's helped is in confidence. Like I feel like now that I've worked in like that kind of professional setting, which I wouldn't usually have done in like part-time work I've done in the past, I feel like I'm set for like I can do any job that comes at me. I feel like if I apply for things in the future, I'm going to feel more confident that I could get accepted. Things like that.
And so speaking of, you're obviously in your third year. So what do you hope to do once you've finished your degree?
Currently, I think I'd like to continue my education, do a master's degree, hopefully at SAL6, and then from there I could kind of see myself continuing in university studies. So I would like to do a PhD in international relations if possible, because I really enjoy the subject matter. And if I could be like a lecturer at uni, I think it would be ideal for me because I'd like to teach, but preferably above secondary school level. But this plan isn't set in stone. And like I said, I have had potentially an offer from my internship employer if I wanted to go back there in the future, or if I wanted to do similar work. I now have experience in the field which I could apply for another place with.
Great. Thank you so much for sharing your experiences. I'm going to give everyone an opportunity to ask any questions they might have. But just before I do that, I'm just going to share one final video from my presentation, which is just giving a little bit of an overview, some more intern experiences from our employee autism program. So thank you very much for listening. And yeah, if anyone has any questions for me or Joe, we'll be happy to answer.
Lovely. Nicole, beautifully delivered. And Joe, thank you for sharing your own journey with your work experience once again. So on behalf of all our mentors, thank you very much for bringing this all to our attention and also providing some useful and practical tips and advice. We do have some time for any questions. So if you do, use the chat. But I've got one, which I'd like to ask you, Nicole. So all of our mentoring sessions are done over Zoom or Teams, so it's not face to face. How do autistic people feel about that aspect of things as opposed to face? Do they prefer it or not?
I mean, potentially this might be a question for Joe as well, I think. But I would say that it's probably preferred.
Right.
Obviously, everyone's individual in the same way that some people really want to get back into the office and go to work. Other people will prefer working from home. One of the reasons that actually I think there's been that big jump in the amount of autistic people in paid employment is because of flexible working.
Right.
In the early insights in our data evaluation, what we've seen is that no one raised an adjustment around working location in their responses, and the reason we think that is because they just didn't have to. So there was none of this, having to ask to work from home. Pretty much all of the roles are hybrid to start with.
Right.
And so I think that what's always good is to offer choice and options. But I think that that doing a video call is preferred. It helps to lessen some of the, I guess, pressure that comes with going to a new environment. You're already meeting someone new for the first time, and if you're in also a place that's not familiar to you, that's just going to heighten some of that anxiety. And also someone can choose to turn their camera off if they're on a video call, which I know that for colleagues that I work with, if they're feeling like they've had a particularly long day or they've just had a lot of sensory input, they prefer to have camera off during the conversation, which just helps them to feel more relaxed as well. So I actually think moving towards this way of working and having conversations that way is probably beneficial for autistic people. I don't know if Joe, you had any opinions on that as well.
Yeah, I think there's benefits to both. I think obviously being online, you're in a familiar environment. Like I'm doing this from my room right now, so it's not like I have to travel anywhere to do it, and that's good as well because you can be more flexible with it. But I do think in person there's definitely merits to it. Like it feels more professional potentially. Obviously it's how you make it online, but it potentially feels more professional. But yeah, I think there's definitely benefits to both, but I'd lean towards online just because of the flexibility.
Yeah, you're more in control, aren't you?
Yeah, and we and kind of with the one-page profile, similarly, we would encourage like a conversation around even how you're going to approach a team's conversation.
Right.
So and kind of offering to the other person to have their camera off potentially, but establishing any kind of social rules, as it were, ahead of the meeting of how it's going to go, even if it is on an online platform. And also never assume that someone knows how to use Teams or Zoom.
Yes.
I mean, I managed to not turn myself off of mute in my webinar this morning, despite using the platform every single day, and having done so for the many, many years of the pandemic. It seems to happen every single time still. So yeah, it's always helpful to check in with someone about that. I think that probably goes for anyone, to be honest, not just autistic people.
100%. Brilliant. Okay. If you do have any questions, then now is your chance. I will just quickly share my screen because I've just got a couple of slides to finish off with. I want to thank our partners who provide some financial support to cover our costs here at Graduate Mentor. We're 2 years in and we want to sustain this for future generations. So huge thanks to our lovely partners. We're going to do this again. I've already spoken to another mentor who's very keen to do a webinar on NLP, neuro-linguistic programming, and how it can help with mentoring. So date for your diary is Wednesday, 18th of January, 1 p.m. to 2 p.m. That's all from me. If you do have any questions, do pop them in the chat. And I'm sure beyond this, there'll be the opportunity to speak to either yourself, Nicole, or one of your colleagues in your team about actually using your service for their own company. Your contact, have you got your contact details on one of your slides, Nicole?
Yeah, I'll make sure that I send all of that across, because there's also some links to specific parts of our website that I think might be particularly valuable, some of the resources that I mentioned. So if I send everything to you, if you're able to share that, that would be fantastic.
I will. I'll put it in our LinkedIn group, which I'll invite you into if we do have any other questions. And yeah, I'll share the information to anyone who wants it. Brilliant. All right. Thank you very much for coming along.
I think
Thank
someone
you
has
for
their
presenting.
hand raised. Sorry.
You're well spotted. Well spotted. Darren Greener. Darren.
Hi,
please either.
Hi,
Yep.
Thank you. Really enjoyed the chat. I'm afraid I did have one or two distractions while I was sitting here near in the background, so I may ask some questions and you may have answered them in the chat. So apologies if you had. I couldn't sort of type it in. It was too much to sort of explain the question and around it really. So you started sort of talking about autism and its diagnosis, and people are being diagnosed, and mentioning the fact that people can be diagnosed at different times of their life and various things. And that led me just into the well, a few things really, from both a mentor and an employer perspective. I suppose from both of those things, it's when it's not diagnosed, or when somebody doesn't expressly define that they have been diagnosed with autism. Are there any indications of signs that as mentors or as employees we should look for, and how do we tackle the issue of signposting someone to diagnosis without causing offence? I think is the thing really there.
So this is something I would have covered if I'd had our 3-hour presentation slot. We kind of cover this area because I think it's really important, particularly as there are so many people who are kind of undiagnosed or perhaps questioning whether they would be autistic at the moment. So being able to support them in that process. So there are some really excellent resources online. They're actually produced by the National Autistic Society. So we do some work in partnership with them sometimes. And it's called Broaching the Subject. So I have personal experience of this quite recently, actually, of supporting someone to consider an autism diagnosis. And really it's about understanding what those kind of main areas of difference are, and those characteristics that might be seen in an autism diagnosis. So whilst we mentioned that not everyone is the same, there are those areas of difference that are more common. So I think if you were working with someone and you perhaps felt like they were finding difficulties with social communication and interaction, or there were sensory things, or they were in particular need of having that routine and structure, the resources that I'm going to share with you would really, really help you to open up that conversation. But I think what it's about is being really empathetic to the person and what their individual situation is like. Not everyone is ready for that conversation yet. So sometimes it can be a way into it is perhaps talking around what their skills are, where their strengths lie. And it's a way to introduce the idea that perhaps communication is a challenging area, and maybe focusing more on some of the ways that could be supported or improved than focusing on coming at it from a, well, maybe your autistic point of view. I know in my personal experience, that is the approach that I have used, is kind of suggesting, well, perhaps you haven't understood the way that information has been given to you, and maybe you could speak to your boss about how they could support your communication better, and kind of explaining what some of the characteristics of autism are, and then suggesting that perhaps do they recognize any of that in themselves, kind of encouraging doing a bit of research around that, but just being really, really sensitive to the individual's need. And then again, with the resources I can share, there is information about where you can signpost them to. So it is challenging to get a diagnosis. I'm not going to lie, it's not a straightforward process, and it can be there's very long waiting lists, particularly for adults. But for those who receive that diagnosis, it can be really, really beneficial for them. It helps open up access to support. And also for a lot of people, I think it can be quite a validating experience, and maybe explain why they've had some of the challenges that they've had and so far.
Thank you very much. Thank you for that.
Lovely, thank you, Nicole. Mark, would you like to ask a question?
Hi, yes, thanks. Thanks, Nicole and Joe. That was, and especially, and Joe, that was a really good insight into your journey and how that internship sort of met your needs. And yeah, thanks very much. I'm just wondering, like, how you've mentioned a lot of strengths that we could be aware of, and each person having their own distinct set of personality traits or strengths themselves, but sort of I think what comes out for me and what I've learned about autism is a definite strength is this systemizing nature, how certain people like patterns. So, and that lends itself well to sort of the tech industry and sort of, so how aware how should we guide, let's say, people that we mentor, and without perhaps putting them into a certain box and saying, well, or how well should we also play on their strengths? It's a very vague question, but I think you get what I'm trying to say.
Yeah, so it's for a good example of this is that one of the universities I'm working at the moment, I'm working very heavily with their engineering department, and that is because in their engineering department they have a higher volume of autistic students than they do in other parts of the university, and so those young people are needing additional career support than perhaps other students in other areas. So it is something that is quite common, particularly I think because of where our understanding of autism is right now. So that's not to say that that's a broad definition, and certainly when we get approached by employers for our employee autism program, it's often people, oh, we've got tech roles, and so we try to encourage people to kind of offer as many open opportunities as they can. If you've seen any of the kind of I know BBC Three did a lot of short films where they talk about where autistic people talk about their experiences, and quite a few of them say that they failed as an autistic person because they're not good at maths, and that stereotype is not being fulfilled, and so it isn't something that's universal. Mm-hmm. However, if you meet someone and they have a lot of strengths in, like you say, that systemization, that recognizing patterns, then, and they also enjoy doing that, then it would make complete sense to direct them towards that type of industry. I also suspect that in those industries they might receive the appropriate level of support because they're more likely to be working with other autistic people, whether they are diagnosed or not, or disclosed or not. But I think actually if everyone in the whole country was to have an assessment for autism or if every employee at every company disclosed that they are autistic, that currently isn't, what we'd see is actually a much more varied picture of the different types of careers. I mean, for example, my dad was a fireman, which is not necessarily a career that you would expect of an autistic person, but he was, and he didn't get he didn't realize his diagnosis until much later in life. So kind of, I don't know if that completely answers the question, but certainly encouraging that if it's something that someone is good at, I think is always a good direction to go in.
Yeah, thanks.
Thank you for your question, Mark. Okay, we've got 5 minutes, so if no one else has any other questions, we'll wrap up and look forward to welcoming you again in the future. Thank you very much.
Thank you.